Hey, this is Tuhan Aditya from Light Haven. Today I'm going to be talking about my experiences training the art of Sanatan Shastra Vidya as a Filipino martial artist, as a martial artist who trains and fights and practices and teaches Pikiri Dashakali, how Shastra Vidya has influenced me and changed a lot of the way that I view the arts that I have already practiced, whether it be the Filipino martial arts, whether it be Muay Thai, whether it be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Sanatan Shastra Vidya is an Indian martial art that is supposed to date back thousands and thousands of years. The current teacher, Gurudev Nidar Singh, says as his akhada or his school or his lineage dates back to 1661. Now, I may or may not have spoken on this channel before about how my teacher, Grand Tuhon Liuti Gahe, talks about how he believes the art of Kali or Pikiri Dashakali has its origins and its roots in India. Now, when I say this, I don't mean the Kalari route, as most people would believe. India has a bunch of surviving martial arts, and I have spent quite a bit of time researching a lot of these arts. And what I have come across, or my sort of conclusions, were that I didn't see so many similarities between the Filipino martial arts and the Indian martial arts. There are similarities in that the same similarities that you might have in all weapon arts. There are only so many ways of slashing. There are only so many ways of thrusting. And so those are similarities, but in terms of principles, tactics, the specific applications of things, I didn't see so much similarity. And then I came across Sanatan Shastra Vidya and I came across Gurudev Nidar Singh. Before I go any further, I do need to preface that these are my experiences. I'm not saying that the observations that I have made over here do not exist already in the Filipino martial arts. I'm not saying that they do not exist in the martial art that I do, that my base is in. I'm saying that training in this martial art, this Indian martial art, has helped me see these things that I may not have seen without having this exposure. I'm also going to be specifically talking about some of the observations that I have made that have helped my Filipino martial arts. I'm not going to be talking about the specific characteristics of Sanatan Shastra Vidya. And lastly, before we go any further, my background in the Filipino martial arts, for those who are new to this channel, I am a Tuhon in the art of Pikiri Dashakali. I am a direct student of Grand Tuhon Liuti Gahe. I teach in Goa. I fight when I go to the Philippines. I fight other places as well, stick fighting. I have a decent base by which I can draw conclusions when it comes to weapon-based martial arts. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is grip. Now, I have been, or if you've trained with me, or if you watched this channel before, you know how obsessive I can be about details. And one of the things that have been nagging me forever and ever and ever has been how to grip your weapon. Now, this is not something that most people will think about or most people worry about, but if you have done any sort of sparring, weapon-based fighting, or if you have even hit a tire, power strikes with a stick on the tire, you will know that very quickly the stick starts to try to leave your hand. Anytime you try to hit hard, the stick tries to fly out of your hand, the weapon tries to fly out of your hand. And this is how my sort of questions into whether there's a good or bad way, or correct or incorrect, or efficient or inefficient way to hold a weapon began. And I've come across many different theories. The most normal way would be you're just grabbing the weapon, you're picking a fist. Another way that I came across is that you're going to start grabbing the weapon from here, from these knuckles, these finger knuckles, like this, and then closing your fist. I tried a bunch of these different ways, and none of them really solved my problem. And then I started looking into, or going back into, my sort of Japanese sword training and looking at the grip that we used to use over there. And then I remember a couple of years ago when Gurudev Nidar Singh, he was talking about how the Indian sword is gripped, and he was talking about almost wrapping it in this way. And the first thing that he said is that we brace the weapon. So if I have a shoulder load, which is a very common loading position in Filipino martial arts, instead of me holding the stick like this, he said we brace it between my pinky finger and the thumb. And so it's braced over here. So I'm not necessarily using muscle to hold it, I'm just bracing it. And if I'm holding it like this, I'm bracing it between, again, my finger and my thumb. Now obviously I cannot make contact like this, right? Nor can I make contact like this. However, what really struck me was, as soon as you start wrapping your grip like this, the first two fingers that that are involved are your bottom two fingers, which again was very similar to some of the Japanese stuff that I had learned. My bottom two fingers became responsible for holding my grip. My top two fingers became responsible for guiding my weapon on target. Now I will preface this by saying that I have not yet reached a conclusion definitively that I definitively will stake my put my hat and be like, yes, this is the best way to do this. This is still something that I am researching, but as of now it is yielding really positive results. I've been doing this for a while now, and again using the bottom two fingers to hold for the strength of the grip, using the top two fingers to guide, and using the thumb then just to bring it all together, has to a large extent reduced my stick flying out of my hand when I am doing power training on the tire. The next thing I want to talk about is the use of the shoulder in Shastra Vidya. Now in the Filipino martial arts we already have this concept of elusiveness, where I am showing my weapon in one direction, faking and then cutting the other direction, or faking and then cutting back the same way. But the concept is that I am showing you my weapon over here, and then as you come to strike it, I take it away, and then I either come across, go across your weapon, or as your weapon now passes where you thought my weapon was supposed to be, as your arm passes I come down and cut your hand. So that concept of elusiveness already exists, or that feint already exists. However, when I am using my wrist, and this has been something that has bothered me for a bit, that when we flow you see a lot of wrist based movements which look beautiful, and the logic for all of this is that I want to keep my arm moving so that it's not a stationary target. However, as long as I'm moving from my wrist, my arm doesn't really move that much. My arm still remains more or less in the same position. My wrist is doing the movement, my arm is not necessarily moving so much. That's problem number one. Problem number two is you tend to, in the Filipino martial arts, we tend to rely on, whenever we're using these wrist type of movements, on whipping actions to deliver power. So a simple example is, I go a diagonal cut, that's a whipping motion, and the retraction from this is what's going to give me the power into the retracting, the coming back other diagonal, right? So I can do the same on the other side, whip, and that's the retraction is what gives me power for the next strike. Now I love doing this, I love flowing with this, I've used this in fights all the time, but Shastra Vidya approaches this a little bit differently, both in terms of power generation as well as being elusive. And the way that they solve this problem is they don't use the wrist, they use the shoulder. So if I am using the wrist and I am going from here, I am striking here and I want to go across to the other side, this is the amount of motion that I can get just using the wrist. But if I start using the shoulder now and I start moving from the shoulder, I can move my weapon a lot more dramatically and a lot more. Instead of me just going here and here, I can now move it all the way across just using the shoulder. And this use of the shoulder really opened up a bunch of possibilities for me, so that instead of me having to just rely on faking and cutting, I can literally fake and come up all the way to the other side while using my footwork to get a better position. So again, instead of me faking to cut, where if I make a mistake my hand is still going to get hit, I can literally be coming and faking and going to the other side. And again, there's so many possibilities that you can that come into play as soon as you start utilizing your shoulder and your scapula more. I'm not saying don't use your wrist, although I will preface this before I go further. Using an Indian antique sword, a real genuine Indian antique sword with your wrist is almost impossible. I've tried it and it's really hard. You have to use your shoulder as a base for generating movement. So there's nothing wrong with using your wrist, but also it does pay to explore moving your shoulder as well. The last thing I want to share with you guys is the idea of using your entire body to drive through a cut. So generally the way that we cut, whether you pivot on the foot or not, which I do have opinions on, which is, this video is not the time for that, but essentially I'm looking to cut. This is how I would normally cut in the Filipino martial arts. If I am adding footwork in there, cutting, 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 cutting. There is hip, there's my hip turn involved, and there's a slight sink of the body involved. Now the sink and the hip turn are both there to add power to the cut, help you add sort of more mass behind the edge of your weapon, as well as to help you control the weapon. So generally Filipino blades are heavier towards the top, so as I'm swinging them, they want to pull away from me. I don't want the weapon to control me, I want to control the weapon. And so sinking with the hip turn is a good way to be able to control the weapon and essentially guide it on target instead of letting it take you away or flying away from you. In Shastra Vidya, a similar concept exists, except there's no hip turn, there is a sink, but the entire body moves with the cut. The whole body moves with the strike. So whether I am thrusting and then as I'm slashing out, my footwork makes my whole body move. If I'm slashing, my body moves behind it, slashing, my body moves behind it, so that every single attack has your entire body driving through, whether it's driving forward or whether it's slashing as I step back. My whole body is almost one with the weapon, and my whole body mass is behind the edge of the weapon, driving through that whole cut to get maximum amount of penetration and maximum amount of damage. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, if you learned from what you saw, please do like and share this video. If you have anything to add, please leave that down in the comments down below. Please do subscribe to the channel. All of these things really do help out the school and the channel a lot. A huge thank you to all of our patrons. Thank you so much for your support. If you'd like to know more about our Patreon page and the exclusive content that we offer over there, check out the link in the description I'm going to leave down below. Lastly, our online classes are up and running. Our residential program is up and running. So to train with us from wherever you are in the world or to come here and train with us in Goa, check out the email address I'm going to leave in the link down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and see you in the next video.